You seem to be a nice person.
Well, today is September 1st, 2016, and I'm interviewing Melvin Heselov in Hillsboro, Illinois, at the Tremont Ridge Assisted Living.
Yeah, they call me Mel, though.
Mel, okay,
Yeah.
All right. Mel is 97 years old, having been born on July 20th of 1919.
Correct.
And Mel, for the recording, would you please state in what war and branch of service that you served?
I was in World War II in the quartermaster service.
Okay. All right. Well, first, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, and a little bit about your parents and your family?
Okay. Well, I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, 1919. And I was born in St. Elizabeth Hospital in Youngstown. And, well, my father's name was Morris, and my mother's name was Bessie. And as far as we know, my mother passed away when I was 10 years old of cancer she had her double breast removed. And Dad was always in the grocery business. And when I was 10 years old, we moved to South Dakota. And Dad had a general store. He was in partnership with a Mr. Todd. And we were there for a couple years. I went to the first and second grades. I remember my teacher's name was Mrs. Boots, Boots. And then when I was, and my brother was 1 year old, and my sister was 7 years old. And then we went to, Dad moved to Washington Springs, and also a small town. And the only town that was known there was Mitchell, South Dakota, and Mitchell had the only corn palace in the world. And then we had a Model T Ford, and we were going out east, and we got on a hill, I still remember, and we couldn't climb it, and we had to get out every little bit and put a stone under the wheel to keep going. And I remember the only car that passed us up was a Graham Page. You probably never heard of it. And then we moved to Farrell, Pennsylvania then, and Dad was in the menswear, and with the wife of my health. I still remember the barbers were, I think, 25 cents for a haircut, and I remember what it was for a shave. And let's see. Then, my mother got her first case of cancer then of the breast. And so we moved at that time to Youngstown, Ohio. And Dad was in the grocery business then. And my mother, I still remember, was lying in bed when I was 10 years old and passed away on Thornton Avenue in Youngstown, Ohio. And then the next thing I can think of is when I was in school, I was in 6B, and we had a principal by the name of Miss Ellis. She was an elderly woman, and she came into our room, and she asked me 2 questions in geography where places were located, and I named them just like that because I love geography. Well, believe it or not, the next day she skipped me to 6A, and the odd part was 6 months later they put her in the insane asylum. And then we moved to Mahoning Avenue, and Dad was in the grocery business, and a Mr. K come to Dad and seen if I want to take a new paper route, because the kid before us couldn't pay his bills. And Dad told him he thought I could handle it. And so at 11 years old, I started taking 125 daily Youngstown Vindicators. And my brother, who was 8, helped me. And I remember on Sundays we had a wagon with high sideboards, and we carried a bag on each shoulder. There was so many papers, you know, especially on Sundays with 95 papers. They were thick. And I graduated when I was 17, and I'll never forget, our landlord was Mr. Cronick, and he sold Plymouths and Hudsons. And when I was 17 and graduated high school, I bought my first car, and I paid for it with money I had taken from papers. I had saved $200 in silver dollars in the trunk that we had. And I bought my first Plymouth, a 1937 Plymouth 4-door black sedan. And I always remember it. I had a radio in it, and it was rare then. And I used to play it pretty loud. I wanted all the women to hear it whenever I stopped at a stop sign. And then I worked, when I graduated, I worked at Kroger's for 6 months. They paid me $16 a week, and my Uncle Harry asked me to come work for him. He would pay me $18 a week. And so I went to Uncle Harry, and he owned a big coal yard. And I got to be the manager for 5 years. And in 1942, when the war started, he was paying me $45 a week. And I was in the Army 1 month after Pearl Harbor. And I remember they gave me a pass before I would leave for the Army. And I went to visit Jackie. I had met her in Youngstown during peacetime, and I remember she had the prettiest white. She had white shorts on and had the prettiest legs, and I fell for her. And I went to see her before I joined the Army. And at that time, Skeezix in the funny paper was going to be married, and I was considering getting married. And I was in the Army 1 month after Pearl Harbor, and I was in for I went to Columbus, Ohio, where I was inducted, and then they transferred me to Aberdeen, Maryland, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And after 2 or 3 weeks, they sent me to cadre school to become a corporal, and I became a corporal for 2 months, and then and after that I became a sergeant, and I had signed up for OCS prior to signing up. And I still remember Lieutenant Rogers asked me to come into his office. He said, "You've been accepted for Officers Candidate School, and we'd like you to leave shortly." I said, "I don't want to become an officer. I like it being a sergeant. I was just married that day." And he said, "Well, Mel, we need officers." He says, they were going to give me a 3-day pass. He says, "I'll give you a 10-day pass, and you can go with your wife," because I was just married that day. See, I was married in the Army. And I'll never forget, we went to visit in my town, Youngstown, Ohio, and then we went on to New York, and we went to the Billy Rose's Diamond Horseshoe, which is one of the fanciest nightclubs, and also the Latin Quarters, which is also another nightclub, which didn't cost us anything. And then, let's see, I went and took Officers Candidate School for 3 months. It's very difficult. Many of the fellows flunk out. But I made it, and I became a second lieutenant, and they sent me to Camp Maxey in Paris, Texas. And I was there for some time, and they had assigned me black troops. See that then that we were segregated then, and I went with these black troops to I think it was Leesburg, Virginia. And this one day, my captain sent 3/4 of our men out to for a weekend, and he shouldn't have. You're only allowed 1/4 of your men to go out at one time. Anyway, we went, and we told them we had 3 truckloads of men, and we told the men to stay in the black area because they had trouble otherwise. And the first lieutenant and I went downtown, and we spent a couple hours there. And on our way back, we saw Washington, who was one of our men, by a white fence of a white man. And then we told him to go back into the black area because the truck was leaving at 9 o'clock, I guess it was. And the next morning, we found out that Washington was dead. And this was a deep surprise to us. we thought he went back, but I guess he didn't go back, and the white man just killed him. And this lieutenant, the first lieutenant, and me, I was a second lieutenant then, we got a reprimand, and in a couple of days they transferred me to another company, and this company was ready to ship overseas. And I still remember my Captain Owens was the captain. And we were shipped to Pittsburgh, California, a debarking center, and we took the New Amsterdam, which was a pleasure ship for civilians, and we had, I think, 1,000 troops on board, and it took us 20 days to reach New Zealand, and we got to New Zealand, and we let the men walk up a mountain to ease their being in the ship for 20 days, and came back, and then it took another day, I think, to reach Sydney, and there they thought our ship had been sunk. They weren't prepared for us. But anyway, we finally got off and took our men, and we went. This was Thanksgiving of '43, and we went to this restaurant for our Thanksgiving dinner, and they served us mutton, and the men were really unhappy because we had always had turkey in the Army. Well, anyway, it took, we got to Brisbane, and we stayed for a day or so, and then in another day we went to New Guinea. Now, New Guinea is one of the largest islands in the world, and when we got there, we were bombed for a minimum of 2 weeks, but no one got hurt. But the men all dug foxholes, and this I still remember. This lieutenant and I found a Japanese foxhole, and we went in it. And when they dropped bombs, I had my helmet on. It sounds like every bomb is going to hit you, but it didn't. They missed us. So let's see. Well, in New Guinea, we were located in Finchhaven, and we were a trucking outfit. And so our men drove trucks, and it was a very big base. And I became the battalion, the special service officer for the battalion. And I had a theater built for the battalion. And when the enlisted men went into Captain Owens and asked him, what should we name it? They said, let's name it Heselov's Bowl. This is a picture of it.
Sorry.
And I had the Seabees who built it. They also made a picture of two girls in bikinis on each side. And I still remember one day when Bonnie and I were going to play golf. I asked her, I said, do you think that Heselov's Bowl is, now this is 50 years later, do you think it's still in existence? And she says, well, I'll call Google and see. And she called, and she found out that yes, it's in a book written by Carolyn Kelly, and it was attended by a first lieutenant who was a company commander in another company in our battalion, and he used to take his officers to see movies and stage shows at Heselov's Bowl. And she got her telephone number. Carolyn Kelly from Cincinnati, Ohio, who wrote this. The book was something veterans or something of courage. And let me see.
And what was during that time? What was your position? What was your job?
Well, I was still with the company, and I was also the mess officer and the battalion special service officer.
And what does what does a special service officer do?
What's that?
What does a special service officer do?
Well, you might call it that. And then I was transferred to as assistant headquarters commandant in charge of the officers club in Finchhaven. We had about 200 officers belonged to, or 8 there. And we were eating one day, and I had the wax and the nurses eat there. They had a table, 3 sit on each side, and we used to have rats. No kidding, they were a foot long. And this one rat was on this rafter above their table, and he fell on their table. And man, you never heard such screaming in your life. They ran out to the latrine, and the rat ran after him, and they ran back, and believe it or not, they never came back to eat there for a month. I couldn't blame them. Well, anyway, after that, I got promoted to a first lieutenant, and everybody, all the officers, the pilots came in from Brisbane and brought liquor of all kinds, and I never drank before, but I drank everything under the sun, and I got so sick. I went to my room, it was in the officers' club, mess hall, and threw up. And I said, no more drinking for me. Well, let's see. I continued being the officer there, and one of my best friends became Captain Bryant. Now, he was a Jesuit priest, and he was a captain. Oh, and we had a softball game. We couldn't play hardball. We didn't have a room big enough. And I still remember that we had from a USO show, we had Johnny Lindell and Tuck Stainback to the New York Yankees pro team, and we played softball. Father Brian pitched for us. Believe it or not, he was 50 years old, and he pitched for softball. And Johnny Lindell played first base, and Tuck Stainback played left field, and I was always a third baseman. And we beat the enlisted men. And let's see. Then we went back, and well, the next thing I can remember is we were going back to the States, and we came back. I think we hit Pittsburgh or something like that, and I had my brother-in-law, Bob Miller, pick us up, and Russell Sparks was a captain, I guess, came with us. We went back to Hillsborough, and as far as I can remember, I went into my wife Jackie and her mother had a ladies ready to wear store, and I thought, well, I'd never learn anything, it's too sissified. And she says, Mel, we sell shoes and you can be the shoe salesman. Well, I became a shoe salesman, and I got to learn the trade. And we had this store in Litchfield called Rosenfeld's, and I bought a store called Yoffie's, a ladies' ready-to-wear store, after a couple of years. And I used to remember we paid $20,000 for it. I don't know how we got the money to pay for it, but we did. And I took over Yoffie's. And then when I was in Yoffie's, we started making trips to New York for buying with my brother-in-law. And we did that for, we used to go about 3 or 4 times a year. And that's as far as I can remember.
Okay. Well, do you feel like that when you came back out of the service into civilian life, did you feel like the transition was pretty, was it okay for you, or was it difficult?
No, it was very easy, really. I was surprised that I could take off, because I thought I was too sissified being in the ladies' ready-to-wear business. But I took to it, and my wife was a helper too, but she never made the trips to New York with me. But when my 2 children were born, my son got in the business, and he made a trip with Jackie to New York, and they opened, and he had opened up the boutique in Hillsborough, and we had the Heselov style shop and the boutique with his wife, and I had Heselov's. Well, the boutique was a better priced merchandise, and I have a lot of women today who come and tell me I bought this at the boutique. And well, Jim had Ruth Ann working for him, and she was beautiful. She is still beautiful. And he fell in love with her. And since I was Jewish and she was Christian, Jim asked us whether he could marry her or not. And I said, yes, if you love her, you can marry her. And later, he became a Christian and taught Bible class in the United Methodist Church in Hillsboro, and then I became a Christian, and I've been a Christian ever since, over 15 years. And then I was getting a driver's license until I was 90, and 90 I was still driving, but I quit really actually when I was in the latter part of 90 years old. And that's about it.
Okay. Well, is there anything that you would like to say to perhaps young people who might see your interview?
Oh yeah, I have 3 things I want to tell everybody. The 3 things that you want to live long for is to exercise 1 hour every day, love everybody, and think positive at all times. And I want you all to remember that. That's it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mel, for your time and participating by telling your story. And thank you for your service to our country.
You're more than welcome, honey.